Hello and welcome to the CDO Magazine interview series. I'm Derek Strauss with Gavroshe, and we're partnering with the CDO Magazine and CDO IQ and the International Society of Chief Data Officers in a series of interviews with data and analytics leaders across the globe. And today we have the great pleasure of talking with Mahmoud Yassin. Mahmoud is based in the Netherlands, and he is currently the senior data manager at booking.com. Welcome, Mahmoud.
Thank you. Welcome. Happy to be here.
Yes, it was so. Mahmoud has, although he's only been at booking.com for 1.5 years, he brings prior experience in the banking and finance industry, where he's had a lot of great experience in the data management side. And so the topic that we're going to be exploring together, and it's going to be spread across 3 different segments. So, if you're just seeing this now, certainly stay with us for the first segment, but be on the watch for the next 2 segments that'll be coming up in due course. So across these 3 segments, we'll be diving into a whole bunch of really critical topics around data management. We'll be looking at things like data governance, data quality, the platforms for data, and also strategy and roadmaps, all absolutely critical components of doing data management, at an enterprise level, and making real changes in organizations. So it's an exciting topic, and one that certainly our audience is going to be very interested in hearing more from you, Mahmoud. So again, welcome, and let's just jump straight into it. And I want to just re-emphasize the point to our listeners that this is going to be, Mahmoud's comments are going to be really drawing from all of his previous experience. It's not going to be specific booking.com related stuff. It's going to be generically across all the experience that he's had, that we're going to have our discussion. So the first question that I'd like to jump into is data governance. Data governance, if you ask 20 people in in data management, what did you do for data governance, and were you successful, you're going to get so many different stories from people as to even what data governance is and the scope of it, and how you implement it, etc., etc. So let's kind of set the scene based on your experiences in the past. How have you gone about, what's the most successful way, about implementing data governance?
Yeah, I think it's a really great question. And first of all, I'm really honored to be with you and also doing the podcast. Yeah, data governance. I think it's logical, right? That the answer that you will get from 20 people is different, because actually this topic is still under development. It's not like a topic that has been done for 20 or 30 years. So I think that's natural and that's normal. And so yeah, about the question itself. So how would you go about implementing data governance? I think it's really important to realize that data governance is an important pillar of an ecosystem around data management in general. How to manage data, which is the most important asset in any organization. And so it's really core that we realize the capabilities that we're trying to solve in the ecosystem of data management. And of course, data governance is a key capability, one of many other capabilities that's important here. To jump directly into, let's say, some of the tips, I would say, because this is bringing a change to our organization, you want to govern your data, you want to make it more secure, you want to assign people and so on. Then I usually use a framework, which is the PPTD framework. So people, process, technology, and data. I really love to use that framework while bringing any change. So for example, from a people side, okay, let's talk about people side in the context of data governance. You need to have an accountability on your data, right? There's no doubt about it, because without accountability, then things will be loose and no one can be, responsible of anything. So how would you go with your, let's say, the people side of the governance, assigning, first of all, agreeing on your data roles that you need to find. There's a lot of jargons. Can be data steward, can be data custodian, can be data owner, can be data provider. There's no generic thing here, but definitely you need to define the rules for data that supports your or organization. If we jump into the process, so even if you assign the people, but there's no process to guard, let's say, the data governance, then it will be a challenge. So, for example, what happens if an element gets added to your data? So, what is the process? Can you define a process that safeguards the governance while still empowering the people side to do their stuff? So, that kind of balance is required. And if I jump into a third pillar of the technology, what are the supported technologies that you want to have in your organization to really have a seamless way of doing data governance? Because data governance is boring, right? I always say, like, okay, it's like brushing your teeth. Like, who loves brushing your teeth? No one, right? But we do it because we know that at the end is gonna give us something back. So it is this, tedious daily, routine that you need to do. And there are certain technologies, emerging technologies now, that embeds that in its own design. So let's say governance by design, those are really interesting to follow up. And of course, the last pillar of my framework is the data. So what is the strategy of your data? And I think that we will park for the next segment, but it is really critical as well to the complete, let's say, the governance initiative that you have in your organization.
Mm. No, I like it, and actually, I love. This is the first time I've heard someone use that that analogy between brushing your teeth and on a daily basis, because it really is. Governance is something that you've got to have constant attention to, and in just the same way as when you're brushing your teeth, you're really doing something for the future,
Yeah.
of your well-being. Same story with data governance.
Could
So
also be avoiding costs, right, as well. Like,
absolutely,
which
yeah.
is natural, right? Yeah. No
Pain
one
and
wants to
cost.
pay like a few hundred thousand euros for dentist as well.
That's right. No, I love it. All right. So, yeah, one of the things that you touched on is, the people side in terms of the roles and the responsibilities, and that, you've got owners and you've got, your stewards and custodians, etc. The thing that I've always found interesting about, you know, figuring out what those roles are and then assigning them in an organization is to what heights in the organization do you assign those? So I've seen a lot of organizations that just kind of concentrate on the middle management level, just getting people there to be responsible and accountable for stuff. But then I've also seen a lot of organizations where they go right up to the top of the organization and they say, Mr. CEO, you are responsible for the quality of your corporate data resource, your enterprise data resource, and you'd better be, actively involved in the whole governance thing. And then, of course, there's many, shades of, um, you know, uh, allocation, in between that as well. Some organizations focus just on the technology group, and they're going to do all the governance. Others focus heavily on the business side, and others get a balance between the two. So just wanted to get your perspective in terms of, again, your previous experience. What has worked the best in your opinion?
Yeah, I think it's also a great question, and especially that data quality is one of the key important capabilities in a company. So I like, let's say, the third option that you gave, so that balance between what to give to business, because also we have to be mindful in what we throw to business nowadays about For example, if you go to fully denormalization of your data strategy, then that's also an overkill for the product teams and the business teams who handle everything.
Yeah.
And so I prefer, let's say, certain aspects definitely need to be pushed towards, let's say, the producers of the data, usually the product teams. And IT is, in that case, can play also a major role as an enabler for them. So for me, out of many years of experience, how easy and robust and self-service IT can make it to the business is how business is going to adapt it. If you overwhelm them with form sheets, procedures, blah blah blah, they have also other priorities and they need to keep the business running, etc. So
Mhm.
that tight balance, if you manage to have it, that would be a different story. Like how to gamify it, how to make it a self-service. You see nowadays rises of the data marketplace initiatives, like a very simple UI that hides the complexity of doing data governance, but then in an easy way. Those kind of things are key here.
Yeah.
And also one thing to add here is I always found that shift left is a great initiative, and shift left means like you push, let's say, the governance aspect as much as you can at the early stage of the data creation. Meaning, like, if we're talking about data, let's say masking or encryption, or let's say data quality, let's focus on data quality. If you do data quality at the early stage of your product while doing product development, that's gonna avoid us of doing another check on the analytical stages and all the steps in between, all the way till the business intelligence dashboard that the CEO uses. So it's always better if you shift left, let's say, the responsibilities and the practices and the guiding principles and so on towards as early, or let's say as early as the data gets generated. That's going to save you tons at the end. So if you manage to create that culture and also with supporting materials, document, etc., it's a different realm that you're going to operate with, because you will more avoid rather than make thing happen and then react on it. So
Mhm. Yeah, and I think that's a great observation. The earlier you get involved with those types of things in the kind of life cycle,
yeah,
the better, because and then and that way also it's not a surprise. So many, as I'm sure you've seen, so many initiatives. They get off to a great start, and because they don't do the due diligence on the data quality, for example, early in the life cycle, they suddenly kind of run into almost like swamplands, where they get
yeah,
stuck in the mud. And it's like, oh man, it's like a million times worse than we ever thought it was going to be. And then, people kind of throw up their hands in horror. It's going to cost more. It's going to take longer.
exactly. Because data also cascades, right? So it's not like a normal effect. So when you do thing, if a calculation or a number is gone wrong from the beginning, then an analyst is depending on an equation to multiply it with a factor in order to, for example, get a KPI done, cross revenue, something like that. Then if it is really low quality from the beginning, then you're jeopardizing your reporting accuracy and introduce way more risks than it should be. So as much as you can do it in the early stages, that's going to save you tons in the future, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. Great points. Great points. The other thing that is always interesting to me is organizations that say, okay, we're going to have this big kind of focus on governance and quality. And they go in trying to kind of boil the ocean.
Yeah,
They're looking at all sorts of things, and it ends up being really ambitious. Um, I love the notion of critical data elements and kind of boiling things down to some specific things that we're trying to go after and fix. What's been your experience with critical data elements, and do you have any kind of examples that you could share with us?
I totally support you in that kind of classification of data, because if you start, trying to solve everything at once, it was going to be a nightmare, and also you're going to be frustrated, and that's something that can make negative energy to your team or your organization. So I also support that you classify your data into maybe critical data elements and non-critical. And in the bucket of critical, you can put your top priority data sources, stuff that's needed for, if you're talking about a bank, there are certain regulations that you cannot just maneuver around. So you need to supply certain reports. These are critical data elements. Yeah, I'm sure in any other industry, there are certain aspects. So start with these because these have the most significant value as well. And to give you an example, at one of my previous companies, mainly a bank, I used to work in the detecting financial crime unit. So the units that's busy with, monitoring the transactions, flagging the bad transactions that come from potential terrorism or human trafficking, etc. And I started with a very critical report that's being used on a daily basis by the inspectors to see who did wrong or potential cases and so on. So it's really critical. The data is in there. And then through data management capability called data lineage, wasn't easy, but let's say you track and trace the origin of the data that produces this report, and then reaching to the team that is, at least on paper, is supposed to own that data. And hey, team, do you know, are you aware that this data is being used this way? And the team answer was like, no, we're not aware. And this is something that we never, no one asked us before. And then they were like surprised. So bringing these two, producer and consumer, together, they realized that, oh yeah, okay, we didn't know because we found the data on the analytics platform, so we used it. That's the justification from the consumer side. And the producer side said, I didn't give my consent or anything because the data is getting pushed on daily basis to the analytical platform. So it's like a flea market. That's stuff that's really critical and introduces business risk, introduces reputational risk, introduces operational risk, all kind of risk, and that is something that we don't want to happen. So basically, by flagging a critical data elements and maybe emphasizing on them, analyzing them better, that can be a way to introduce different, let's say, better governance in waves, right? There's no, rush in that. Of course, you need to calculate the steps instead of just, we're gonna do data quality for the entire company. That can, if a small company maybe, but in a big one, it would be a nightmare, I think.
Yeah, that's a great example as well. So yeah, thanks for that. And I think that sets us up nicely for the next couple of segments that we're going to
Yes.
dive into as well. In terms of platforms, what kind of platforms support all the stuff that we've been talking about, and then the third segment, about the strategy that we're going to look at. How do you roadmap this whole story out? And so, to our listeners, although this is the end of segment one, I want to make sure that you keep your radar open and looking for the next couple of segments, because then you'll get the full story. So, Mahmoud, thanks for setting us up nicely here for segment one, and we'll see you shortly as we get into the next two segments.
Thank you.